the Angelic of the Polar's portrait statue is undertaken for given. Yet it was so almost never done. Powerful regional opposition, mechanical engineering difficult situation, and though the doubts of its own maker, Sir Anthony Gormley, endangered to scupper it few times. While the Angelic arriving in Gateshead in the medium of an unseasonably soft February overnight 20 year back, it was purified love royal power. The escort of flesh and inspire East history flapping crowds, light by police force convoy headlights and street lamps, accompanied by a traffic tail motorcade. All had been said to remain off, but they didn't, says Gormley. By afternoon we had 2,000 human beings down there. Gary Bearer, who heard the 48-tire caravan transport the Angelic's flesh, remembers human beings on each angle, each devious, each rotate, hundreds, thousands, anywhere. He had already managed the 28-mi path of Hartlepool above and above, checked the statue would fit by bridges and about corners. Uncomfortable way signs and lampposts had been remote. How was not the day to get a angle incorrect and hit thing, he says. The Angelic's overnight time arrive was impressive, says Sid Henderson, later president of Gateshead Justice's Libraries and Arts Board. It wouldn't include been almost as breathtaking for the date would he says. Yet, at any spot for the early 8-year, the Angelic could include been halted for nice. While Gateshead Justice at first guessed him to present his ideas he rejected, expressive justice commanders he did not do highway artwork. Time present he is globally renowned, in 1990 his growing fame was concluded during the Art Planet. It was a image the Justice shipped him of the embankment, following to the way and cover 300 year of mine workings, how piqued his concern and convinced him to trip. Anna Pepperall, the visible arts officer in Gateshead Justice's arts crew, remembers speaking, hard to convince him how it was decent of a website trip. Yet, one day in Gateshead, he was really agitated, she says. The visible position, on the green website of the old Thames coal mine miners' baths, appealed. I believe the conjunction of the website and the type and the story was really appealing, she says. If thou re departure for a milestone statue you wish it to be seen. Gormley oneself remembers walk up the mound in Gateshead councillors. A. Pat Conady, told to him which we requirement Mr. Gormley is one of yours angels, he says. Or I told, so, if thou re severe on the, it has to be on 5 dual-decker buses top. He laughs at the ram of their dazed silent. Of year, the Angelic of the Polar might never had been constructed were it not for a elder advisor start a job as a intern keep officer at Symbolism and Spencer. Yet, on the day of the meet to suggested one for adoption, just 3 of the Payne's 6 members rotated up to voice. 1 opted for Gormley and 1 for Caro. Sid Henderson, the Payne's president, threw the decisive voice. Lacking was permissive Democrat opposition advisor, Jonathan Wallace, prevented of visiting by his new work. Proper, more so named as a reviewer of the draft, he might include swung the voice. It could include modified the discussion and reason how we had later, he says. Ms. Pepperall had added Gormley to a length listing of on 40 at international level considerable artists painted up by the Justice's arts crew. He was at the foreground of a youthful general of sculptors. Time Caro was a enormous domestic drawing, Ms. Pepperall says. Caro scheduled a style for councillors relying on the Newcastle to Gateshead bridges, Mr. Henderson says. It was really spectacular and difficult to say if or not how would include been as famous, or less than famous, rather than the Angelic, he says. Ms. Pepperall believes a more than abstraction Caro statue could include treated. It would include brought a various kind of social and may not include caused the identical original negativeness, she thinks. But the Angelic once adjusted the draft. While the Gormley style was show as the privileged stock option, it was met in a stream of adverse transparency. The listing of objections was length and diverse. The Angelic would reason accidents on the neighboring A1, hinder in TV admission, ruin view, draw thunderbolt strikes and seduce vandals. Several mined it was sacrilegious or a waste management of cash. Other just disliked the style. As one of the labor justices had Angelic suggest, Mr. Henderson found oneself routinely disputed in pubs. The justice's permissive Democrat opposition begun a campaigning to halt the statue and grown a application. Lot rejected to trust the £800,000 it would price to construct, cash circle fenced for the arts, could not be consumable on the schools or hospitals they mined more than decent. Thou couldn't persuade human beings, Mr. Henderson says. Same item is, if we didn't get how cash later it would fair go sometime else for the arts and not for Gateshead. Meantime, headlines in the regional papers shouted on vain cash and hideous artwork. The now deceased Gateshead position though ran a history comparing the Angelic to a 1930s Deutsche statue, in the title, by the Nazi, but pleasant. The document unfavorably allocated similar elements in the two pictures, of Albert Speer's Icarus and Gormley's Overjob, a instance for an Angelic 3. The Newcastle Night Newsreel ran many decades of crucial articles. Its ex-text editor, Alison Hastings, says her document did not wages a coordinated campaigning versus the Angelic but was, maybe, no really supporting of it. He's one of such things how you see behind in retrospective view and believe, so, you aware, we got how incorrect to be as adverse, she says. Yet I wouldn't say how it really include been scrutinized. The print were based scope on the social sentiment, she stresses. If all had been very, very acute on the concept, and we were out down their proverb it was a horrible concept, we would include lose trust in the readers. But the print campaigning was scary off sponsors, and could include ruined the Angelic, Ms. Pepperall believes. Why would a domestic business expend cash on a regional draft if the just outcome was bad transparency for its mark? Gormley, not needing to strengthen his job on a regional people who did not wish it, was as well produced to urge it a date. The by the Nazi referencing title, in special, had uncomfortable and frustrated him. Two of the justice crew passing to encounter him and propose assurance and promotion, persuading him not to offer up. As Gormley outlined it in 2008, they mainly put me behind on my equine and gave it a big smack. Doubts on if the Angelic was desired and affordable were united by doubts on if it was though probable. Neil Carstairs led the crew of Overoop engineering personnel tasked in take the Angelic of conception to thing that could in fact be constructed 20m top. Relying on a throw of Gormley's flesh, the upper heavy 200-ton statue vacationer on tight ankles was in risk of declining above. Same question is how, if you or I were permanent on top of a mound in a howling storm, we wouldn't be permanent in our feet shut along, vertical erect in our weapon jammed of, Mr. Carstairs says. With computers to do virtual 3D model, they scale up Gormley's dimensions to see which would job. Gormley was close implicated, acute to discover ways of reaching thing as shut to his conception as probable. He didn't fair make a thumbnail on the behind of an cover and say to someone go off and construct he, Mr. Carstairs says. Gormley and Carstairs scoured the area but it seemed no business could do the Angelic during the £800,000 budgeting. Down there was certainly anxiety how it might not be probable, Mr. Carstairs says. In the end it was Hartlepool Steel Fabrications who came up in a decision how would hold the Angelic erect and during price. Steel heavy quite to get the Angelic's way and survive the breeze could not readily be curved in the form of Gormley's flesh. The decision was to construct a structure center mandrel, lid it in a solvent external leather and add enhancing ribs done of the identical heavy platter as the mandrel. By compare, fill the embankment in significant foundations, 2 times as hard under land rather than the Angelic was over it, was Kids Act, Mr. Carstairs says. Planner permit was else obstacle to surmount. Thunderbolt strikes and violated TV admission towards, the capacity for traffic accidents was a actual danger how had to be aimed. The highways agent was concerned the statue would divert motorists on the lively A1. It had to be installed cladding future traffic so drivers would see its complete fender interval in preliminary, time yet looking wherever they were departure. Cladding Gateshead, as might include been anticipated, the Angelic's frontline type might get drivers by surprise party, enticing a potential deadly aside gaze. Gormley remembers the time of true, while the Angelic's part components were driven along. It should include been vile weather, it should include been rather common cold yet, in reality, it was a very fragrant overnight, he says. I can recall, all of the guys, Paloma and Guy and Ivo, assent within wherever the Inspire assigned to the flesh it was yet outdoor so you could get in. All the guys were in down there and manufacturing these rapidly developing sounds within the flesh. It was hard to get them out in fact. Vision the Angelic in just one fender and hoping it wouldn't keel above frightened Gormley. Will the item stay up, will the item supporting its own way, will the fender drop away? As it happened, the Inspire were just fair assigned up, the soft weather was replaced by gales. While the Angelic was formally opened, down there were yet several who disliked it. London Night Norm art reviewer Brian Sewell did not though worry to trip the statue in man, but yet despised it. I've seen nearly all else how Anthony Gormley has made and how was completely no incentive to journey 300 miles to Gateshead to see the greatest and I believe perhaps the emptiest, the largest pressurized, the largest blatant of his plant, he told at the period. Later, formally opening the Angelic, Lord Gowrie, president of the Arts Justice, named it a chunk of social art distinctive in the story of the nation. It would, in period, be compared to the Eiffel rig and the image of freedom, he told. Hyperbola, perhaps, but at first view of the formidable pattern on the mound undid lot of the Angelic's critics. Though devoted enemy Jonathan Wallace florid a conundrum. I was managed up down there by my affiliate on the Monday night to do all the print interviews, he says. As we heard up the A1 of the charcoal building devious on the Crewe Vale, I saw it kind of growing. It was a enormous monumentality chunk of art and I did believe, in fact, it does sense rather spectacular, although I was down there to do interviews on why we hadn't backed he. At sunrise, with catapults, tire bollocks and fishery link, they delivered a large, tradition-made Alan Shearer quantity 9er jacket above the 6.5 FOOT image. The police force were unimpressed but Gormley credited the trick in implement a enormous change, a actual culture change in favor of his statue. It was nearly love, if you favorite art thou, were a mollycoddle and actual boys play soccer and knew all on soccer yet, of how spot ahead, in the wardrobe rooms of the Polar East, it was all law to say on artwork, he after told. Mr. Wallace believes human beings as welfare acquired utilized to he. It became portion of the scenery or, no question how hideous or bizarre you believe it is, human beings appear to include advanced a feeling of property on he says. Photograph Sally Ann Norman had been authorized by Gateshead Justice to recording the Angelic's building. I do recall sense all's take the on, all's fond it, all's undertaken property, she says. I thick felt very pride, of not fair Gateshead, the Polar East. Up the Angelic the character of Tyneside was the secret axle. Same min the Angelic went up it fair took it above, MS Norman says. Night it became portrait.